there, knitters! Welcome to episode 31 of Knit Talk with a Tech Editor. I'm Megan of the Unapologetic Knitter, and I'm a tech editor. So today we are going to be taking a look at DPNs, or double pointed needles. I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the lengths that I have and when I use them and some alternatives, and then maybe come up with some solutions with you on how to avoid some common issues with DPNs. So let's just jump right in. I will admit to not being a particularly avid user of double pointed needles. I find having that many tips to deal with a little bit of a challenge, but that doesn't mean that I don't have them and don't use them. They're just not my go-to. So I have two different lengths of DPNs, and in this case they are actually different materials, but my largest set of DPNs are bamboo. The reason I like the bamboo just for my own use is because they're less slippery. Because they're not something that I commonly use, my fingers tend to fumble with them a little bit more. So having a slightly grippier needle, so not as smooth like a metal needle, works really well for me. The other set I have are the carbons. And I will be honest, I don't actually know if they are still in production. I will look that up and leave a note in the comments below just to make sure. But the reason I brought them both out was to show you that they come in very different lengths. And I believe you can get both longer and shorter versions of what I'm actually holding right now. So these are a 6-inch DPN from tip to tip. And these are 7.5 inches. I think they're commonly referred to as kind of an 8-inch DPN, but I think you can also find true 8-inch long DPNs. There are shorties out there that are 5 inches or 4 inches long, and I think you can even find DPNs up to 10 inches in length. I truly hope you can't hear the sounds that are being made by my dog right now. He's chewing on a toy and it's making terrible noises. Okay, so DPNs are used generally for projects that have small circumferences. So, for example, when I started out knitting, the first time I saw someone knitting in public was actually a pair of socks, and they were using double pointed needles. And when I started to get into knitting myself, I started using them for closing the crown of a hat, or I would also hear about people using them for sleeves because they're smaller circumference. Depending on the size of garment you're making, you may not need to use them at the upper arm. You may be able to use a 16-inch circular, but as the circumference gets smaller, a lot of people transition to DPNs as they get closer to the cuffs. So there are some options to DPNs, or double pointed needles, for small circumferences that are available. One of them is a small circular needle. So this is a 12-inch long needle, including the cable and from tip to tip. What I struggle with small circumference circular needles is the tips are very short when compared to a standard circular needle, where the tips are usually 4 or 5 inches in length. And so I find my gauge changes pretty significantly when I use a small circular needle. So I don't use them very often. I use my preferred alternative, which is the magic loop method. In that case, you're using a cable needle that is 32 inches to 40 inches in length, and you're creating basically a long loop. So if your two needle tips are out this end, you've got a huge loop of cable on the other end, so that you're still mimicking working flat, kind of like you would be doing on DPNs, but it's only over two needle tips instead of 4 needle tips. For me, that's just a little bit less intimidating, so I tend to defer to magic loop for small circumference knittings in just about any case I can. But there's one where I definitely don't. So when I'm knitting a small circumference, I definitely prefer the magic loop method. It works really well for projects that you can work flat, like a sleeve or a sock, especially when they're shaping along an edge. Because you're creating kind of this trapezoid shape where you're decreasing only at the edges and not in the middle, it still works really well with the magic loop method. However, when it comes to shaping the crown of a hat, where you're decreasing circumference all the way around, in my personal experience, magic loop doesn't work very well. Because the stitches that are on your needles are trying to remain flat in line with the needle, they're kind of fighting the circumference of the hat the whole way. Now, I know that there are lots of people out there who love magic loop and will use it on the crown of a hat. It's just not been my preference. So if you're newer to knitting and you're wondering when to use magic loop versus DPNs, I would definitely recommend using DPNs on the crown of a hat. The one tip that I have found very helpful when you're working with DPNs on the crown of a hat is to go down a needle size. If you've been using a circular needle, just like this, for the body of the hat, where you're knitting around and around and around, when you change to DPNs for the crown shaping, so where you're decreasing, I always go down a needle size. Now, this could just be for me. I have found that my tension loosens up significantly when I move to DPNs, so going down that needle size just keeps everything a little bit tidier and tighter, especially between your needles. So for me, one of the biggest downfalls of DPNs is the ladder that I get between my needles. If you're new to DPNs, or actually even new to magic loop method, when you get a small differential in tension between your two needle tips and you can see the bars running between your stitches, that's called laddering. And it's not anything that you're doing wrong, it's just when we move our working yarn between the two needles. So if you've knit all the way across one needle and you've finished all of the stitches and you now need to move to the next needle, there's a small difference in tension that can occur, doesn't always, but can occur between the needles. And for me, it's very pronounced on DPNs, but not on magic loop. So when I am working on DPNs, except in the shaping of a crown, and we'll get to that in just a moment, I do kind of a rotation around my needles. Let's say you've got 60 stitches on these 3 needles, right? Let's say you've got 20 stitches on each of your 3 needles. So you would have your end of round at the end of one of those needles when you cast on. When you begin working in the round, you would work all 20 stitches on, say, the first needle, and then instead of stopping there, you would knit the next stitch off of the second needle. So you've now got 21 stitches on needle 1 and 19 stitches on needle 2, which sounds uneven. But then you would work all the way across needle 2 and pick up the next stitch off of needle 3. So you've now got 20 stitches on needle 2 and 21 stitches on needle 1. Then you'll knit all 19 stitches remaining off of needle 3 and pick up 1 stitch from needle 1. So you're rotating your stitches around your needles by 1 stitch on every round. This does mean that you need to employ a stitch marker if you're going to be doing this. Because your end of a needle will now not necessarily be your beginning of round, because you're rotating your stitches by 1 stitch, you want to make sure you've got a stitch marker there. But what this does is distribute your tension, if you have a difference in tension between your needles, across all of the different stitches on your needle, rather than always being in the same column of stitches. It just helps get rid of some of the laddering that you get because it's not always in the same column of stitches. Now, when it comes to shaping a crown, it's debatable whether that's a great idea, moving your stitches around the needles. And this kind of comes into a preferred best practice. When I am working with DPNs on the crown of a hat, I really like to try and get all of my stitches as evenly distributed as I can around a needle. So to use the example we just went with, we started with 60 stitches. So it's very easy to break that up into 20 stitches on each of 3 needles. But what if you're working on 4 needles? Okay, 60 divided by 4 is 15, which is no problem. You can put 15 stitches on each of your needles when you're working in the round. But when it comes to the crown shaping, I like to try and divide the stitches on each needle so that they are in multiples of the decreases that I'm working. So for example, if my decrease round, just say the very first one, is knit 8 K2 tog, so we're using 10 stitch decreases. That's not a problem if you're using 3 needles. You can still put start with 20 stitches on each of your 3 needles for a total of 60 stitches. And that means you would have 2 repeats of that 10 stitch interval on each of your 3 needles, right? However, if you are using 4 needles and you have a 10 stitch decrease interval, you may start with 15 stitches on each needle, but because 15 is not divisible by 10, you would have an uneven number of stitches on your needles. So you would have, say, your first interval of 10 where you knit 8 and then knit 2 together. But then for the next interval, you're going to knit only the 5 remaining stitches on your first needle before moving to the second needle to knit 3 and then knit 2 together. The issue for me when that occurs is when I get to working the K2 tog of whatever the stitch repeat is around the needles, sometimes you end up with the K2 tog needing to occur at the end of one needle and the start of the next needle. Your 2 stitches are on opposite needles. So when I come to shaping a crown, I like to divide up my stitches over my DPNs so that I've got multiples of those stitches all the way around. Let's say we don't have quite as tidy an interval of stitches, or pardon me, total number of stitches. We're still going to use the same decrease interval. So what if I had 50 stitches on my needles? Still divisible by 10, so that's not a problem, but I can't easily put an even number of multiple of decrease repeats on every single needle. If I have, say, 3 needles that I've got my stitches over, I would have 20 stitches on one needle, 20 stitches on the second needle, but I would only have 10 stitches on the third needle. And that still just helps me track where I'm doing my decreases so that I know that the final stitch on any given needle will still be a decrease, but it's still as evenly distributed as I can get it while maintaining that multiple of my decreases. Okay, I think that's where we're gonna leave it for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed our little conversation about DPNs. I know today was a lot less technical than some of our latest videos, but it was still a conversation that I thought would be really great to have, given that the holidays are right around the corner and a lot of the projects we tend to make for other people's are smaller and definitely require the use of DPNs. So next week, I am not going to be here. I was going to try and wait and tell you this in the week afterwards, but I'm just too darn excited. I'm going to take the week off because we have adopted another lovely little dog. Her name is Callie, and she is coming from the same rescue that we adopted Moo from last fall. We love this rescue foundation. They are called Saving Hope Rescue. If you have any extra dollars burning a hole in your pocket and you would like to help some dogs or cats in need, I've got a link in the description below the video to their donation page. Any little bit helps. We really believe in the work that they're doing. They've already brought us Moo, who has brought us so much joy and some challenges along the way. But Callie will be arriving here. Well, by the time you see this, she will have been with us for a couple of days, but we're going to be spending that first week with her, just getting to know her, making sure she's settling in comfortably with Moo and Peaches, and yeah, just spending a little bit of downtime with her. So I will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new video, and I hope you will join me then. Thank you so much for being here with me today for this little chat about double pointed needles. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and happy knitting.